Hey everyone, and welcome to Lift, a podcast about business owners uplifting the people around them. My name is Manesh and I run Catalyst Content. Today, I'm talking to Naomi Anderson, who owns and runs Aged Care Ready, the company that helps elderly clients and families navigate the aged care sector through placement advice, advocacy, and consultancy. In this conversation, Naomi talks to me about a whole bunch of stuff, including how she tastes food at the different aged care facilities that she visits, about hug curtains, and how she's certainly not a bed broker.
Essentially, what we do is assist our elderly clients and their families navigate the aged care space. And it's one of those things that until you need some help and guidance, or until you are going through that personally, it's not something that you think about. And I think people kind of take for granted just how overwhelming that whole system is. But in a nutshell, we are registered nurses and enrolled nurses with first-hand experience in the sector, and we hold the client's hands and their family's hands to get through that sector to find the best outcome for that individual.
How did you end up in the aged care sector?
So I was 18 at the time, and I had decided that I wanted to study nursing. And it was probably the first 6 months of my degree that I decided, okay, well, let's go get a job as a carer in the aged care sector. And I have to say that the first few shifts, I probably came home crying because it was just so overwhelming, and it was an entirely different world. It's not something like I'd expected before.
So what was it in the first few shifts that really kind of overwhelmed you and kind of brought you to tears?
I think it was because my first introduction was into a dementia wing in an aged care facility, and I had never really been exposed to that before. So growing up as a child, I was quite removed from my grandparents, so I hadn't really been around elderly people before. And so then walking into a dementia wing and seeing people that had no cognitive capacity and, they were soiling themselves, they were confused, they didn't have recognition of personal space and things like that, that was really confronting for me. I think for me, I learned very, very quickly how to communicate and how to relate to those types of residents or those clients. And it's just about going back to basic conversational skills, and anything that would be seen as confrontational or conflict type conversations don't go down well because they don't understand what's happening to them at that point. And so one of the first conversations that I remember having was one of the residents was adamant that she was in a different facility, or she was in a different place than where she was actually at. And, trying to redirect her and reorientate her to the current time and place was not successful. And that's something that really has stuck with me, that what they believe is happening is what is happening to them at the time, no matter what is happening around them realistically or what I believe. It could be she's in a nursing home, but she believes that she's at school. And so that's the story that you need to go with, because that's what she believes in her heart that's happening, and it's too distressing to correct her.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I guess when you're telling me that, the way I relate to it is I feel like it's a bit like improv, like acting school, where when actors learn how the yes and rule, where they just go with whatever is being given to you. Do nurses get trained to kind of improv conversations with patients of dementia? So how did you kind of learn these skills?
Experience. You just have to learn on the job. And I mean, nursing is such a professional job now. It's, it's a degree or a TAFE course at the very minimum. But I strongly believe that a lot of nurses still learn by doing. And I think there should be more physical placements where nursing students are learning on the job more than what they are in the classroom.
just kind of hands-on learning. Hey, learn by doing. Hey, for me, as you're sharing this, I'm just wondering about, how many patients or the elderly in these aged care centers really face dementia. Is it quite kind of widespread? Because I'm starting to notice my friends of my parents are starting to, show signs of dementia. Some of them more advanced than others. I have like an uncle who can't find his way back home. He's driving right in front of his house and he doesn't recognize it's his own home. How prevalent is this in aged care facilities?
I think it's more prevalent than what people realize. I'm not a doctor. I don't have the statistics behind this, but from my experience, I feel that as we're living longer, our bodies are still capable, but our minds are deteriorating. And so we're seeing a lot more dementia patients, dementia residents in the system than there were 10, 15, 20 years ago. And obviously, it's an individual experience and different people present different ways. But I would say that the majority of residents in aged care have got some form of dementia.
I wonder how much of the opposite is true as well, because I've got a grandmother who is aging, and I just, I've begun to really respect people who can age just by virtue of their age, because it is such a kind of humbling kind of journey that requires really a lot of emotional and spiritual resilience. I think, my grandma, she is now in her 90s, and the opposite of kind of dementia is happening with her, right? I mean, I'm using that very loosely, of course. What I mean is her mind is super sharp. She can still beat everyone at Scrabble and Sudoku, but her body is struggling to, just digest food, and she can, barely walk.
And it's interesting that you say that, because what we find, it's either one or the other. Either their body gives up and their mind is still there, or, like I was saying before, they lose their cognitive capacity, but their body is still strong.
I want to back it up a little bit, and I'm just really curious about why you decided you wanted to be a nurse in the first place.
My dad wanted me to be an accountant. And I said, absolutely not. What else can I do? I think I was always drawn to some form of healthcare. I have quite a empathetic and compassionate nature, I believe. And so my goal was always to help people. And when I was growing up, I thought I wanted to be a vet, because I was always, finding injured animals and helping them and things like that. And then as I grew up, I related more to people. So I think I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to do when I left school. I thought maybe physiotherapist, myotherapy. And I thought from a career perspective, I would probably have a lot more options if I did nursing. And then for future planning, if I was to get married and have children, that is always a career path that would be available. And I'd always be able to just walk into a job. And so I'm glad that I made that choice. I wish I probably had have done a little bit more further study before having children of my own. But yeah, I think that's really kind of how I ended up where I did.
Yeah, look, there's so many nurses in my family as well, and I just have such respect for the profession, because it requires a lot of kind of care and emotional intelligence and that kind of nurturing side. But at the same time, it requires such kind of strength of character and such resilience. And like, good nurses are caring, but they're firm.
Absolutely. Yeah. I always kind of joke that it takes a special type of person to be a nurse, because we see so much, and that would traumatize a lot of people. And I think that's why we probably end up with such morbid senses of humor.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so I want to talk to you a little bit more about Aged Care Ready. Now, how did you transition from being a nurse in an aged care setting to deciding to become your own business owner?
So I wasn't always in aged care. I know that I worked in aged care when I was studying my nursing, and then I went and did my grad year. I worked in the acute system for quite a few years. I did my postgrad in anaesthetics and recovery, but something just kept drawing me back to the elderly. I think I'm a bit of an old soul, and I just absolutely adore elderly people. But what actually led me back to creating a business after being a nurse, and we may go into this a little bit later because that was a hard transition for me, going from being a nurse to a business owner. But there was one particular incident, and there had been a number of incidents leading up to this particular story where I had kind of had the beginnings of thoughts about what I could do as a business in this industry. But there was one incident that really kind of sparked and ignited that fire in me. And in this instance, I was actually a clinical care coordinator in a relatively large organisation. They had 5 wings in this facility, and I was overseeing 3 of these wings. And I happened to find myself one morning in one of these wings, which happened to be a low care wing. And when I say low care wing, it means that the residents who lived in this wing were fairly independent. They could mobilise on their own. They were able to make their needs known. They had cognitive capacity. They were quite social, and things like that. So I found myself in this wing when one of the administration staff took a tour through. So there was a family looking for a place for their elderly mother. And why this caught my interest was because the son was absolutely distraught. He was beside himself. He was crying, and I thought, like, something's obviously happened very significantly and suddenly. And so I stopped and I listened for a little bit, and this admin person was saying to them, well, we have a room available in this wing and we have a wait list for this room, but I can see how desperate you are. So if you sign the contracts today for permanent placement, you can bypass that wait list. Now, this was my first red flag because I know that the wing that had, well, this wing that had that room available had this room available for a number of weeks and there was no wait list. And so when they left, I asked to see what's called the aged care assessment. So everybody going into aged care needs to have one of these assessments because it essentially approves them for care and funding support and things like that. So I had a look at the aged care assessment, and this lady had been, up until her hospitalisation, living at home by herself independently in a retirement village, and she had been doing some washing, and she dropped a bucket of water, and as she's dropped it, she's tried to catch it. She hadn't had a fall or anything like that, but as she's tried to catch this bucket of water, she's actually fractured her humerus, which is the bone in your arm. And this in itself was quite odd. So reading further, during her stay in hospital, they'd done all the scans and they'd found that she essentially was full of bone cancer, which is what, had caused this break. And during that stay in hospital, she was there for a couple of weeks. She had deteriorated significantly to the point where she had lost her cognitive capacity. She'd lost insight into her ability. She was impulsive. She'd had several falls in hospital. She was full nursing care, meaning that she was no longer mobile. She needed full assistance with showering, toileting, eating, you name it. So there was a very significant deterioration in her health in a very short period of time. Now, reading this and going back to the information that I just given you, that this was a low care wing, it's clear to see that she was not appropriate for this wing. So I'd gone to my boss and I said, look, we can't accept this lady because she's way too high care. We don't have the staff members. We don't have the resources. We don't have the equipment. And even if we had the equipment, we physically can't get that equipment into this room because of the way that it's set up. Not to mention that the room that's available is on the opposite end of the wing to the nurses' station, where somebody could supervise her quite closely. At that point, I was pretty much told that I need to check my loyalties and that they need to sell a bed because they're bleeding money was the term that was used every day that room is empty. And so I said to her, that's fine. However, I'm not going to be personally responsible for this when this goes south and she has a fall. Anyway, She was admitted the next day. Her son had wheeled her down to her room in a wheelchair. As he was walking back up with a carer to the nurse's station, we heard her fall.
Oh, no.
So obviously we ran down, and this poor lady, I can't even describe the scene. She'd clearly broken her hip. She'd suffered head trauma, and later on we found out that she'd had a fractured hip, fractured pelvis, and significant head trauma, which she ended up passing away of within 48 hours. So this lady had never met me, but she significantly changed the course of my life. And she, I never even got the chance to say thanks to her, because she would never understand how much she has changed my life.
Because she's opened your eyes to the reality about how the aged care industry is a business, and you're describing it as quite a cold kind of business.
And so it was that moment that I thought, well, these families, they need advocacy, they need help, they need support. Because if I had have walked through that facility as a person taking a tour for this person, there's no way that I would have said that that is an appropriate place for her. I would have recognised those things. And, you don't know what you don't know. These families are overwhelmed. They're under a lot of pressure to make these types of decisions. They are vulnerable, and it's a highly emotional time for them. So I just felt that something needed to be done, something needed to be created to help these families.
How soon after this incident did you make that choice and actually start taking, concrete steps, leaving that facility, starting your own business? How did this kind of accelerate your journey, and what was that process like?
I left relatively soon after that because I guess a part of my conscience felt guilty that I hadn't been more firm with my boss. And I reckon we probably started the business within a year after that.
Tell me how you kind of have designed the service that you offer. I understand that your business is designed to kind of help people navigate aged care, but where are the pitfalls that you're navigating around? I guess what I mean is, what is the process of engagement with you?
So I guess we can talk about, what makes us different as a company, because obviously there are other placement consultants out there. Technically, that's what we're called. Sometimes we
Placement consultants?
Yeah, and sometimes we're called bed brokers, and I strongly despise that term because we are fiercely independent in what we do. We work for the client, and we quite clearly demonstrate that everything we do is revolving around our clients. So we don't take commissions or kickbacks from any facilities that we refer to.
Do others
Yes.
take kickback?
Yes, they do. So they offer, I'm quoting here, so air quotes, a free service to their clients, but then they actually get paid by the facility. And we don't believe that's in the best interest of the client, because they're just, they're a broker. They're marrying up availabilities and the need, whereas we physically find the right home for the client. And I guess our other point of difference that we were quite adamant on from the get-go is that we are qualified to be making these, recommendations and giving this advice. So we're all registered nurses and enrolled nurses, and a lot of our competitors, the only experience they've had is placing their own loved one into aged care, which we just don't believe is enough. With the Royal Commission and everything like that, there was mention of placement consultants and services and things like that. It didn't go too in-depth into it, but I believe, like the Royal Commission into the financial industry, there is going to be more legislation, more oversight, more governance into our roles than there is at the moment, because there is none. So we already run our business as if one day we were going to be turned around and getting audited.
Yeah, fantastic.
So we cross all our T's, dot all our I's. We write really detailed reports. We justify all of our advice based on sound clinical knowledge. We do due diligence checks on every single facility in the area that client's looking for. We do our own nursing assessments on the clients, and things like that. And we liaise with multidisciplinary team such as financial advisors, solicitors, to ensure that we encapsulate everything that that client needs rather than just saying, okay, well, this facility down the road has a bed, there you go.
Yeah, I see. You really kind of ensure that there's a good fit, facility and client, right? So,
And it also means that we work for the client. Sometimes that means that we can rub up the wrong way the facilities, we can be quite firm with them, but at the end of the day, we're advocating for the client, not for the facility.
can you give me an example of how this has happened in the past, where you rub up the facility the wrong way?
There have been instances where clients or their families have approached us where they have already been placed, whether that's by a family member or a competitor. They're not happy with the facility, so they engage us. There have been instances of neglect that we have seen and things like that where we have gotten involved and said to the facility manager or the care manager, this is what you're doing wrong. The client's engaged our service, we're advocating for them, and this is exactly why the family want to move this their loved one. So that's one example.
So do they get defensive, or how would they kind of interact with you? How would they respond differently to you than if a client was to say that to them directly?
When a client or a family member says that and, they don't have that medical background, it kind of gets brushed under the rug a little bit sometimes. Some facilities, this makes kind of all facilities sound bad, but that's not the truth at all. Some facilities would take that on board and use that part of their continuous improvement processes, whereas some facilities just brush that under the rug and then label that family as being difficult.
Yeah, I see.
Whereas if we're brought on board and, we demonstrate that we know what we're talking about because we know the industry so well, because we have run facilities ourselves, we understand the processes and we use the terminology that they're used to, they either get their back up or they try and fix things really quickly.
Okay, I want to ask you a little bit about just from the standpoint of an everyday, person. Let's say myself. When I come with my parent to talk to you, what's that journey like for me? What are the 3, 4, 5 steps ahead, and how are you going to kind of help me? What's the process ahead for me?
Yeah, I think here it's really, really important to note that although the children are the ones who usually engage our service, our client has always been and will always be the elderly person, and that can be a bitter pill to swallow sometimes, because if there's siblings with differing opinions, we will say that that's not in the best interest of the elderly person. However,
yeah, of course,
with that being said, we really need to determine where that elderly person is in their journey. Have they had an aged care assessment? Are there significant changes in their health or their cognitive status that make them unsafe to remain in their home? Or has their health declined, but are they still safe to be to stay in their home if they had supports in place? So we strongly believe that even though we are placement consultants and our bread and butter service is placing people, the best place for somebody to be is in their own home, as long as it's safe to do so.
Okay.
So
you try not to...
Yeah.
You try not to take the job even.
Yeah. We determine whether or not that person is safe at home.
Yeah, okay.
If they're not, could they be safe at home if supports were accessed?
Yeah, okay.
And then if they get beyond that stage where they aren't safe at home, even with supports, then we look at, okay, let's have a conversation about what the goals are, what mum or dad would want if they had the cognitive capacity to articulate that, and what would they be looking for in an aged care home. And that could be anything from how it looked to how it felt, what the staff were like, the other residents and how, they interacted with them. Are they an introvert or are they an extrovert? Are they really social?
I
that
see.
sort of thing. So
you think about their personality and their kind of
absolutely, their
social
cultural
needs and
background.
yeah, okay.
And obviously finances come into play there as well. So one of the first things we ask is, have you had financial advice? If you haven't, let's get you some advice around that, because there's, aged care is very expensive. And the difference between getting a financial planner and not getting a financial planner can be a few $100,000. Like
Yeah, wow.
they can save you a lot.
Yeah, I see.
And then, we talk about future planning, including advanced care directives. So if something was to happen with mum or dad, how would they like to be treated? Would they like, full resuscitation, or would they like, to be treated with antibiotics, or would they want no treatment? And then who would they want there at the end of their lives? And then we can talk about what's important for the estate once they pass away and things like that. So what their goals would be there. And what I mean by that is that sometimes, there may be 5 children that this person has. Is it important for there to be money left over in the estate once that person passes away to be divided by those family members? Or are each of those children not fussed by that? Let's just put more money into the quality of care. So we discuss a very wide range of things, because our service is so tailored, so individual, because everybody is unique in their own right.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It sounds like you really respect the client and invest a lot of time and energy into really kind of getting to know them, not just in the present, but also in terms of projecting scenarios into the future.
But also in the past. So we delve into what they were like as a person, what they used to enjoy, and that sort of thing. And then stemming from that, we do our own nursing assessments as well to see what type of physical and emotional support they would benefit from at that point in time.
And all this information, I guess, feeds into the choice of facility, right? It's not about who's got the available room that faces the park.
Absolutely.
It's about the kind of life that they will be living in this space.
Yeah, and what other residents are there at that time? Are they going to fit in? So yeah, it's all about that one individual person.
So it happens over, it sounds like multiple conversations, no?
Yeah, it's an ongoing conversation. The heavy stuff gets spoken about in the first 2 to 3 conversations. The entire process generally takes about 2 to 3 weeks. However, we have placed people relatively quickly if they're needing to get out of hospital, for example, put them in emergency respite to buy us extra time, essentially. Or if they're, future planning and they're not quite ready to go into care, then obviously that would take a little bit longer.
Okay, so 2 to 3 weeks for this detailed kind of conversation to really understand the client and their needs and to map some of these things out. And then what's the next step after that?
So once they engage us, then we start all our due diligence checks. So like I said before, we actually physically look at all the facilities in the area. We look at their notices of non-compliance, sanctions, audits, public reviews, any historical business data. So if there's a change of management or a company has bought that facility out, that can sometimes be a red flag. But, any of those previous audits, if you're somebody who has not worked in that industry, they would make no sense to you. So we have a very, very good, clear understanding of how that facility is actually managed before we physically set foot in that facility for a tour.
Does the client join you on these tours?
Not initially, just because we find that that's too overwhelming for them.
Of course.
Because sometimes we will see up to 10 or 12 facilities.
Okay.
And when we physically tour those facilities, we're not just looking at the things that they will show us. So the salesperson will show us. So it's not just about the physical environment, so how the building looks. We're also looking at things like, especially now, infection control processes, catering, lifestyle and leisure programs, the resources that they have available, the equipment they have, how they educate their staff. But predominantly, we're looking at the other residents who are there, if there are any signs of chemical or physical restraint, Do they look healthy? Are they happy? Are they engaged in their surroundings? And then with that, we have a good idea of what funding that aged care facility would actually be getting. What a lot of people don't understand is that each individual will be funded by the government based on their individual care needs, and that money goes to the facility. So being nurses and having that background in aged care experience, we understand that, a high care resident, that could mean a number of different things, could bring in $200 to $220 per day of funding for that one resident. And, if you walk into a facility and you go into a wing of 30 of these residents, but can only see 2 staff members, that funding is supposed to go towards staffing. And so we start asking questions like, how are you spending your funding? Is it appropriate? Is it in the best interest of the clients that you have placed here already?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So just by you visiting as the expert, you'll be able to kind of get a sense of the integrity of the organization, really. Because I was going to ask you about how, just as, in your story that you shared earlier, back when you were, a young nurse in these facilities, it's easy for the salesperson to kind of pull the wool over your eyes, right? But, I'm sure they're still doing a song and dance for you as well. How do you kind of, look under the hood?
Yeah, so generally the person taking the tour is an admin person. They don't have a clinical background. So in those instances, they can show us everything they like, but we will ask to see extra things. We'll ask to taste the food if we have to. But there are things that they can't answer that we need to have answered, and that's where we ask to speak to the clinical managers or the facility manager.
It's really interesting. It's because a lot of placement consultants are not nurses and don't have a nursing background. They're not expecting these questions, is what you're saying.
No. Sometimes they get a bit caught off guard by it, and they're usually the ones that won't return our calls, but that just means that they've struck themselves off our list for that particular client, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
It just means that they're not the right facility for our client at the time. When we do physically tour these facilities, there's usually a clear front runner or maybe 2. And so when we're ready to make those recommendations, we actually provide written advice to the family and the client. And that details, everything that we had spoken about before. So in terms of the client themselves, their history, their current needs and what their future plans are, what research we did, and then also what tours we took, and then our top 2 recommendations and why. And then from there, that's when the client or their family members actually take the tour of those 2 facilities.
Do you feel that, there's so much going on in the aged care space, especially through COVID, right? And even now, right, with this current, I don't know, are we on the 3rd or 4th or 5th wave? I don't know. But
who knows? I've lost count.
Yeah, but it's still hitting the aged care facilities, right? I guess what I want to know is, are these facilities trying to change? And are they trying to become, it sounds like your business and perhaps some other businesses out there are kind of leading the front of keeping these guys honest. And I'm just wondering about what their appetite is for change.
I think it's an ever-evolving landscape. If COVID has really taught us anything, it's that we can be innovative and resourceful. So if you think back to the first couple of outbreaks that we had, I believe it was St. Basil's, where, a lot of people died. Unfortunately, they were kind of our guinea pigs because we had never gone through this terrain before. We didn't know what to expect. The virus itself was a very different variant to what it is now, and so many people died. And, we had never seen anything to that degree in terms of the amount of PPE that we were going to be using and, what infection control processes needed to change compared to now where, if somebody tests positive, they don't shut down the whole facility anymore. They either shut down the wing or they isolate the individual by themselves. So it's ever evolving, ever changing, and, processes have been changed significantly since then.
That's encouraging to hear, right? I mean, that's what you want to hear, that people are doing their best to care for.
Unfortunately, the media paints aged care to be such a enemy almost. Like, obviously they have to sell their stories, but even during the height of COVID, there were some really beautiful things that were happening in aged care facilities, and aged care facilities who were handling things really, really well. And an example of this was where there was a facility out in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne who created like a hug curtain. So obviously that's at that time where
Wow.
families couldn't come in and physically touch or see their loved ones. And this facility they put like a one of those shipping containers outside, and they divided it in two, where one was just like right in the middle, it was a plastic curtain that they had molded arms into so that their loved one could put their arms into this plastic curtain and embrace their elderly loved one. And I just think that's so beautiful. Like,
Yeah, wow.
and that, you would see 10 negative stories and you'd see maybe one of these, but there were so many other facilities that were, bringing these innovations in. It just wasn't talked about because it wasn't selling the story.
So do you have favorite facilities?
No, not really. We don't play favorites just because it always comes back to the client, like I've said. Yes, I have better relationships with some facilities than others that I know will do me a favor when we need emergency respite, for example. But that's not a deciding factor as to whether that client will be placed there or not.
Hey, I want to shift gears a little bit and ask you a little bit about your journey from becoming I'm just thinking about your dad, right? You think, dad wanted you to be an accountant.
Yeah.
And, you're getting closer to that, it feels like.
Yeah.
In terms of how conscientious you are about your work and how detailed you go into with your due diligence, etc. So, and how you're, working now with financial planners. It seems like your dad's dream is coming true. Right? You are going to become an accountant.
Don't tell him that.
So, but I'm curious, how did that kind of transformation happen for you? I mean, what's it been like for a nurse to become a business owner, a growing business owner?
It was a really difficult transition, I have to say, because the empath in me wants to help everybody, but that's shooting myself in the foot, really, because at the end of the day, I need to put food on the table for my family. And so often, even still, I will help people and not charge them. And so that has been probably the most difficult transition for me. So I have a business partner who isn't involved in the day-to-day running of the business because she's not clinical. And like I said before, we're quite adamant that all of our staff are going to be clinical, especially the front-facing ones. So she was my first mentor because she runs other businesses that are very wildly successful. So I learned a lot from her. And then what I also learned is that you can't just have one mentor because, again, like our clients, everybody has their own little nuances and their own little niche specialties and things like that. So I have been quite selective with who my mentors are, and they're all in different fields. So, I have a mentor who's really great at sales and marketing. She's really great at, business development and things like that. So I have found that you just need to find the right people and learn from them. And as the saying goes, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Yeah. So how many staff do you have now?
We have 5 with us at the moment.
And where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Well, we do get a lot of inquiry in Sydney and Southeast Queensland, and we do have a placement consultant in Hobart as well. So in 5 years, I would hope to see that we have got established offices in all of those states and we are able to hire more staff. I'm really passionate about, equality and particularly women in the workforce and making sure that they, have the flexibility and still get paid properly. So typically we hire mums because I think it always comes down to, if you treat your staff right, they're going to treat you right, and they're going to treat, above all, your clients right. And so by creating an environment that has that flexibility, they can work from home, they can choose their own hours, that, works around their families, but then still pay them what they're worth, they're going to be happier and they're going to be loyal, and ultimately they're going to be the best thing for your clients.
Yeah, that's such a great strategy. I know an accounting firm that does that as well, like kind of tap into this market. They're not necessarily full-timers, but there's so much capacity that they're unlocking by going into moms.
Yeah.
And on a part-time basis especially. And those sound like really ambitious plans, but actually so achievable. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like you're a woman on a mission. I really hope to see that come true. And I'm every confidence that this is going to happen for you, and really wishing you well. And
thank you.
Yeah, I think you're adding so much value. We've got an aging population, and you're adding so much value to Australia. And I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to come today and just share your story with us, and, wish you all the best.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's all we have from this conversation. I hope you got a bit of lift from that. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great day ahead.